On this episode of Public Scrutiny, we'll be reviewing and commenting on BBC Question Time from Middlesbrough, which aired on the 27th of February 2020.
On tonight's panel, Nadhim Zahawi, the government's Business and Industry Minister, formerly Children and Families Minister under Theresa May. Labour's Shadow Health Secretary since 2016, a former advisor to Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband, John Ashworth. Alison Phillips, a lifelong journalist from student newspaper to national titles such as the Sunday People, now editor of the Daily Mirror. Aisha Vardag, celebrity divorce lawyer, known for making prenup agreements an accepted part of the law in England, described by Time magazine as the diva of divorce. And social entrepreneur, crossbench peer and co-founder of The Big Issue magazine, John Bird. To our panel, to the audience here, and of course to you at home. You can join in the conversation on social media at BBC Question Time. So do put your points of view. We'd love to hear them. Right, let's take our first question, which is from Dawn Galloway.
Given the current strains on the NHS, is the government prepared for a coronavirus pandemic?
Now, I know about the same amount as most people when it comes to this subject. I have seen the numbers rise though. Airborne, like the cold or the flu, but with a 28-day incubation period, people could have it and infect others for 28 days without showing any symptoms themselves. Apparently, the younger you are, the more likely it is that you'll survive it. I'm not worried about it though. If it's going to get me, it's going to get me, just like anything else could. Deal with it if and when it happens.
Right, well, the figures are going up and up. John Ashworth?
Well, it's an excellent question, Don, and that's what we're all asking ourselves, aren't we? I mean, coronavirus now has turned from a serious issue for China to potentially a massive trauma for the world. It's going to have huge impact on the global economy and probably slow global growth and trade. But most significantly, it looks like we are heading now for a health crisis, a pandemic, and indeed the World Health Organization have warned countries to prepare for a pandemic.
The World Health Organization is one of those organisations that I don't trust at all. I've often wondered how it is that they know which flu to vaccinate people against way ahead of time, but I digress.
Now, our thoughts obviously have to be with the patients who have got the virus at the moment here, and all the NHS staff and Public Health England staff who are working exceptionally hard. And as it happens, funnily enough, despite what I normally come on these shows and say, I don't have any criticism so far of the government and NHS England's handling of this crisis. I've been broadly supportive of the government's approach. But the key thing is this. We know, after 10 years of cutbacks and austerity, 10 years of cutting over 15,000 beds in our National Health Service, 10 years of failing to recruit the staff we need, we're short of 40,000 nurses, for example, in our NHS. We know our NHS is under considerable strain. The numbers, let me give you a quick fact. The numbers waiting on a trolley in a corridor in a hospital because they can't get a bed, in the last year of the Labour government, that was around 61,000. In the last year of this Conservative government, it wasn't 61,000, it was 850,000.
How much has Britain's population risen since the last year of a Labour government? And it's not like any of you prepared for a rise in population either. In fact, you lot spent years trying to stifle criticism or simply dismiss the concerns that people had. Even now, with this subject, he has no criticism of the Tories but makes a couple of party political points.
That's the scale of the deterioration in the NHS under the Tories. Last week, 80% of critical care beds were occupied. It meant that last week there was around 700 critical care beds free. That's about 3 or 4 beds per hospital. So there are now serious questions for the government that if, and it is still a big if this coronavirus hits us and it becomes a pandemic, can the NHS cope if they don't put in some extra emergency funding? I'm calling for the emergency funding because at the moment the NHS is under huge strain and pressure after years of Tory cutbacks.
Both sides are as bad as each other. Labour borrow until they get thrown out of office, and the Tories cut services in order to put the economy back on track. Here's an interesting thing though. When austerity started, the UK was £750 billion in debt. By the so-called end of austerity, after years of tightening our belts and living within our means, the UK was 1.5 trillion in debt. Where exactly did that money go?
So, Nadine, and we've been hearing the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has been saying all along the NHS is absolutely prepared, is in excellent shape to deal with this. Hearing some of what John said, and you've heard NHS staff have been saying how tough things are at the moment. Should we get into a position where the coronavirus situation becomes worse? We don't know if it will or not. Will the NHS cope?
Well, we've been preparing now for a number of weeks. We have a COBRA meeting every week. I'm the lead minister from the Department for Business because of the critical infrastructure for the United Kingdom and, of course, businesses like the automotive sector and retail. But the question that Dawn had was about the NHS. We've tested 7,000 people to date. The NHS has been coping incredibly well, and I pay tribute to the nurses.
This guy's waffling. The question was, if things get worse, will the NHS cope? There's no reason for him to tell us what he's been doing or to bring the automotive sector into it. The nearest he's come to answering the question so far is to say that up till now they have coped. Past, present and future. The question is about the future. Don't waste time talking about the past.
The doctors and all the staff that have made this possible. So the NHS has been coping well.
But the question is, should it? Well, let's because that is a question. If it should get worse, where will the staff come from? Where will the beds come from? That's what this is about.
The reason we've been having a COBRA meeting every week, and the Secretary of State for Health has a cabinet update every week and updates the Prime Minister every day. And I, for example, in my department, have stood up a team that's actually doing this with every sector or every day, is because we have to make preparations for the worst case, or the sort of the worst case scenario has to be planned for very, very carefully.
So have we got enough beds, for example?
We've got...
Because we don't appear to have enough beds at the moment for what we've got.
Well, John is wrong because we've got 100,000 acute beds. He should know that because he's the shadow minister. He started off well by saying, you know, he's backing the government.
Well, of course he would. He wouldn't want to be seen to be turning it into a party political point scoring exercise, even if after saying those words, that's exactly what he did.
On this issue, of course the NHS will be under more pressure, but the reason we've been making these preparations, working across the whole of government, every department is at COBRA every week to do this, is because we're making these preparations, because you've got to prepare for the best worst case scenario so that we're ready. We've got a phenomenal team of people in Public Health England who are doing this work, but as I say, we have to prepare for the best worst case scenario, and we'll be ready for it.
There's a suspicious lack of substance to his answer. I think he doesn't want to talk too much about the actual measures that will be taken in the event of an escalation. I don't really blame him. Life will change if this situation gets worse. If he told everybody in advance what measures might be taken, it could cause unnecessary panic.
I'm not, if I may say so, I'm not wrong on bed numbers. We have lost around 17,000 beds since 2010. And the key thing is the critical care beds. They were at 80% occupancy last week, which meant there were around 700 available. We also have a more serious level of beds called ECMO beds. We only have around 15 of those. So the key thing is, and on the acute bed number that you've used, yes, your figures are broadly correct, but most hospitals are running at around 95% occupancy on those beds. So the point is the NHS is overwhelmed.
But you should also recognise
that is the issue.
We in the last 75 days, one of the things we did was made it the law of the land that the additional 34 billion a year of funding will be delivered for the NHS.
That's not enough money.
That is what we did.
You've spent 10 years running down the NHS with austerity.
You bankrupted the country.
I'm going to come to Roosevelt. Can I just ask you one thing? Should we, and this is not in any sense to try and overstate the issue, because we are not at a pandemic at this stage, should it become more serious in this country, are the military on standby?
So every department is at COBRA every week.
Including
the Ministry of
military
Defence,
as well?
Every department in government is working together at Cobra, we are making all the preparations for best worst case scenario because that is the responsible thing to do.
Imagine if he had said, well, if it gets worse, we'll have to implement a state of martial law. Areas will have to be locked down. People will have to stay in their houses, and it will be enforced by the army with a shoot-to-kill policy if necessary. What would the audience reaction be?
The man here in the front in the glasses.
If people have been diagnosed with coronavirus, would they be put into a normal hospital or would they be isolated in a specialist unit?
Actually, I suspect there might be quite a few practical questions of that nature, so I'm going to have a quick go around the audience and then, because I think there's probably quite a lot of public information people would like. Yes, the man behind you.
Yeah, I think we are still thinking in terms of national or local issue when it's really a global threat. So I believe that we should forget our politics for the moment and consider it as a globally and deal with other governments, other countries, and try to tackle this pressure.
How is it that all roads lead to globalism? Did you know that the World Health Organization has extraordinary powers in the event of a pandemic? It can pretty much take control of everything. I'm starting to get a bit suspicious of this situation.
Rather than just thinking it in local terms.
It's the woman at the back there. Yes, with the glasses at the back.
If the NHS is in such a struggle anyway, should we not reduce the struggle by stopping travel?
By cutting down on travel. Can I take one more? Yes, the woman in the glasses just in front of you.
Where will the staff come from to cover the extra workload that this pandemic might cause?
Right, now, Nadine, that's a lot of questions for you. I'm going to go round the panel and then come back to you, if I may. Alison.
I think that we are now in a point where this is becoming a really serious concern to many people. I think particularly to the elderly or people with existing health conditions or people with very young children. And although I think that the preparedness has seemed good so far, there are still stories that we've had coming through to us at the Mirror from GPs that are still uncertain about which information to give out. But generally, the containment seems to be going well. But I think to John's point, we do know that our NHS, there is absolutely no slack in that system now. We've had 10 years where the funding hasn't been there. We know that something like 25% of people who go into A&E at the moment, they'll be on a trolley for more than 4 hours. We had a story the other day about a gentleman who was 93, RAF hero. He had to wait on a trolley for 12 hours. So how are we going to cope with that? Plus the coronavirus, plus, as the lady said there, if then we have NHS staff becoming ill or have to go into self-isolation. So this is a major, major concern. But I think that you're quite right that perhaps this isn't a time for politics, but this is a time for ensuring the NHS has got exactly what it needs to get through this.
Editor of the left-wing Daily Mirror makes a political point and then says that it's not a time for politics. What a surprise.
John Bell.
A pandemic is where something very, very big happens to the world. In 1919, more people died of influenza than died in the First World War. So we're talking about enormous movements, social movements. This is not just a health crisis, it is a social crisis. To expect the NHS, irrespective of whether it had every available bed, to respond to a crisis that could lead to a rerun of 1919, we need a lot more. We need the army, we need all of the private medical facilities in this country, and there are many, many, and say to them, you're in, whether you like it or not. The nationalisation of the health service, in the truest sense of the word, for a particular time, in order to deal with this pandemic. We cannot deal with this pandemic simply on the basis that as our colleague says, simply on the basis of the existing services that are offered by the NHS. We have to look beyond it.
So
and we
what
have
do you
to
think
look
should
at
happen,
people.
John? What do you think should happen then if we can't just use the NHS?
I would turn it, I mean, I'm one of those persons who came here and said, come on, let's not exaggerate.
That's funny. Not more than a minute ago you spoke of how the flu in 1919 killed more people than the First World War and that we could be on the verge of a rerun. We need the army, you said.
But let's be honest, we don't want to exaggerate. We don't want to look at it as a breathless crisis where my brother won't stay in a hotel in London now because he doesn't want to catch coronavirus. I mean, that's a bit silly, isn't it?
Actually, no, John. Given the circumstances, I think it's probably wise to avoid major population centres, especially if it's about 28 days until people show symptoms. Some people are self-isolating. Why is it sensible to self-isolate but silly to not risk exposing yourself to the disease?
But we do have to nationalise all those facilities in around health. We just have to dragoon them in, look upon it as though it's like a war. We're a war at getting rid of this pandemic. And this is exactly what happened in 1919. And it caused the death of millions and millions of people. But the thing was, it was turned around.
You know, to my ears, it sounded like he was saying that the solution caused the death of millions and millions of people, but the situation was turned around. I might have heard him wrong, though.
And also, it's worth saying that the death rate in the Spanish flu, which you're citing, was way higher. I mean, exponentially higher than we're talking about with
it's
coronavirus.
screwed Britain for many, many years.
And many other countries too. Aisha?
I think we have to analyse the situation quite coolly because, of course, everyone is afraid of the deadly virus and people are panicking, people are changing all their plans, people are sort of locking themselves in their homes. We have to remember that as best we understand it at the moment, about 80% of people are fine. In fact, many of them just don't even realise they have it, which is one of the reasons that it's so difficult to catch. About 15% of people have moderately severe symptoms but aren't really at risk, and about 5% of people are really at risk and under threat. It's that 5% that we really have to worry about and look after very closely, and that's what the NHS has to be very, very ready for.
Ah, OK, that's good info. So 4 out of 5 people will be fine, 1 out of 5 are at risk, and a quarter of those are in trouble. But presumably the 80% who will be fine could pass it on to the others.
Well, the question is the government prepared?
Yeah, I mean, I think effectively no one was prepared for this. There's generally, I would imagine, there's generally, people have contingency plans. We had SARS and we had MERS and we've had swine flu, so there is that sense of people doing something. But of course, we all know the NHS is underinvested, is struggling, and we need to restructure it. We can't do that this week. We have to take a few emergency measures. You have to look at things like clearing out hospital beds. So, for example, sometimes hospital beds are used as an alternative to care because there aren't proper care structures in place. We need to find ways quickly to get care structures in place so that hospital beds can be used for the people that need them for this crisis situation. However, what I do think is what the government has done has been quite amazing in terms of giving people the autonomy and the ability to look after themselves in quite an organised way. The whole sort of drive-through testing schemes, the sort of call us and we'll come and test you at home, those things which enable people to look after themselves. Because I think people in Britain, in the UK, are quite responsible, really, about things. They look after themselves and their neighbours and their families. And so giving them the means to do that has been the real sort of game changer. Compared to, for example, Italy, which locked the borders, very early on.
Well, they've got a lot more cases, in fairness. Let's put some of these things that you've mentioned here, Nadine, back to you. So, where are the staff going to come from? You asked about isolation units. In fact, we have seen some isolation units at the beginning now. Where are the staff going to come from? That's the first question.
So let me try and address all those things. The strategy is obviously one is to contain the virus, delay the virus, then, of course, do the research and mitigate.
Yeah, but where are the staff going to come from? That was the question. Well, let's get straight to it.
There are lots of questions.
I know, but that was a very clear question.
Well,
where are the extra staff going to come from?
Today, data was released that we've got 8,000 more nurses in the NHS now than we had last year. So there are more staff already in the NHS, but we're going to work across the whole of government. Some of the other questions
that were asked. Where are the extra staff going to come from? I don't know about these 8,000 extra nurses. I don't know if that's fewer nurses than would have left or actually more nurses. But with the situation we are in at the moment, should there be an increase in the number of coronavirus cases, do you accept there'll be a need for more staff, or do you?
Well, so we plan across government at COBRA every week to make sure...
No, we know about those.
Yes,
but where are the staff going to come
you can't magic up staff overnight.
No, of course.
The
but
health
that's
service
the point of the question,
isn't
it?
The health service at the moment is well equipped and is dealing with this crisis in a good way. But what I'm trying to say to you is, if we do get to the best worst case scenario, then we have plans in place across government to make sure that we deal with it.
He has his lines to say and he's sticking to them, no more, no less. So now I'm wondering what the plan actually is. Perhaps they know that they can't do much about it, maybe contain it as much as possible but let it burn itself out, so to speak. Most people will live, some people will die. Either way, he's telling us that there are plans in place, but for some reason he won't go into what those plans are.
Can we draconian in?
I would just.
Could we draconian in the private sector?
Well, we can do lots of things that are available to us to do. The question was about doing work internationally, working together on this. We've already, again, part of the COBRA team, put £45 million to work through the DFID team to other countries who are not coping as well as we are. And of course, travel advice, again, has been important. We've been making sure that all our airports and ports have got very clear advice and also monitoring. So we're working across the board to make sure that we're ready if we do get to the best worst case scenario.
I think in fairness to the government, they are following the advice of the Chief Medical Officer. And the Chief Medical Officer, I think, is showing exceptional leadership on this issue. And that is why I said in my remarks that so far, I don't have major criticism of the approach of the government, of NHS England and Public Health England. But quite clearly, as I think has just been exposed, if this does turn into a pandemic, the government clearly have got no idea where they're going to get the staff in the NHS. We're already short of 40,000 nurses. We're already short of the beds that we need. We're already short of the resources. So far, I have been supportive of the government, and I pay tribute to the Chief Medical Officer, Simon Stevens, who is the head of NHS England, and the leadership of the NHS. But if this takes a turn for the worse, I think, as we've just heard, they've got no idea when they're going to get the staff from to deal with this.
You may be right, but my thinking is that Nadine Zahawi is deliberately not saying much, not just about the staff, but the plans in general. I don't believe that they have no plans. I think they're just not making them public. I think you know this, and you've decided to take an opportunist shot at him, knowing that he can't respond to it.
Okay. A lot of you asked about coronavirus, but an awful lot of you also asked about this next question, which I want to come to. Let's hear from Vaughan Davies.
Is the fall in life expectancy proof that austerity kills?
Right, so you are referring, I think, Vaughan, to a report that came out today, authored by a Professor Marmot, who talks about the decrease in life expectancy. He said the damage to health and well-being is unprecedented over the last 10 years. He also said the damage to the nation's health need not have happened. It is shocking. And he laid the blame mostly at the door of austerity. Alison.
I think this report is one of the most shocking things that we've read in many years. And I think perhaps here in more than most places, because one of the most striking points in the report was that women in some of the most poor areas in the northeast of England are likely to die sooner than they would have done 10 years ago. And this comes on the back of that historically we've always found life expectancy is increasing. And certainly across the board, people who earn more are going to live longer is the bottom line really in this report. And it does come down to austerity. And I think it's a whole combination of things which we see across the board in so many problems now. It's not just one thing that's caused this. It's a whole selection of things. It's poor housing, it's job insecurity, it's the breakdown of communities, it's the breakdown of essential services. It's all these things have added to this sense that the people with less are going to suffer more. And there are a whole range of other issues that are going on in our communities as well. That there's a greater sense of isolation, there's mental health issues, but so many of those can then come back to the knock-on effects of austerity. And it's 10 years into this now. And yes, we've got a government that is committed, or said they're committed to doing all sorts of things to make it better, but the scale of this problem, which was created by a Conservative government, which we have to remember.
She's rewriting history. Austerity started in 2010 after the global financial meltdown in 2008, and so it was a solution that was implemented by the Tories as a response to something else. Prior to that, Gordon Brown bailed out the banks and said at the time that we'd be paying that debt back, even though we didn't owe them a penny, over the next few generations. The left always screw the economy, get thrown out of office and then spend the following years blaming the Tories for the hardships they impose. It's like a ready-made narrative for when they're back in opposition.
Is so great now, and the damage is so enormous to people's lives that I do wonder whether they really have got the ability to turn it around in the way that they have promised people, such as people in the North East who voted for them.
Ashley?
I think it's tricky because, as I understand in that report, male life expectancy was still going up. It was women's that was going down. So you have to look at changing social roles as well, and the way that women used to be much more in the home, and now they're working a lot more, and often they're working without enough support with their children, with the other elements. So they're trying to do absolutely everything. And so men are getting better, women are getting worse. That's something to look at. Of course, we do have to think about austerity and the impact of austerity, and I absolutely agree with Alison. We have to look at what's happened to our communities and the fragmentation and the lack of connection between people, the loneliness, the unhappiness.
Actually, Aisha, can I just mention that as far as the North East is concerned, life expectancy for men
has gone down for men as well. I read something else that said that for men in some areas it had gone up, but I'm perfectly willing to accept what you're saying. But of course, austerity does have its impact, and I do think that the impact on communities has been very grave. And I think, but it's not just austerity. I think it does combine with other elements, like the general fragmentation, like people living in their own homes, watching their TVs, not going out, not connecting with people.
3017, not connecting with people. I'd not heard this lady before. I kind of like her. So how many times have you been on a bus and everybody's staring into their mobile phones, like they're hooked into the Matrix? We used to laugh when people uploaded pictures of their dinner to social media. It's like people live the digital life more than the real one. All of a sudden I'm aware that I spend a lot of time making videos to put on YouTube, but at least I take my ferrets out for a walk. The digital era has brought about the disintegration of the community, not all on its own. The real world often sucks, which is why the digital alternative sometimes seems better by comparison.
And this sense of loneliness, destabilisation, I think mental health, which leads to alcoholism, drug abuse, unhealthy living and depression, all of that combines together. And we have to fight all of those things at once as part of the new vision.
Let's hear from some of the people in the audience. Yes, you in the white top.
In the North East, in the most deprived areas, people are living 5 years less than in the same areas in London. That's a huge health injustice. How is the government proposing to right the wrongs of the last 10 years?
Well, I know in the North East, women's life expectancy has decreased by almost a year in more or less the last 10 years. In London, for example, it's increased by about a year. Yes, the woman in the striped top, you want to say something?
Oh, my father was born 1920. He died 99 3/4. He died October last year. He was 99 3/4. His brothers and sisters all lived to a great age. He ate to live. He didn't live to eat. He rode a bike. It's people now who don't do these things.
So you think it's a lifestyle? I mean, the professor of the report blamed mostly austerity, but you think it's people's lifestyles, do you?
Well,
which unconnected to austerity?
My father was born the 1920s, which had the austerity, the general strike. He fought in World War II. My grandfather fought in World War I. He lived till he was 87. My dad lived till 99. I'm still here.
Sounds like you've got a very strong gene pool there. Thank you. Yes, the woman in the blue top.
Thank you. I think the lady in the white behind me was referring to a report that came out, I believe it was last year, where it said that people in the northeast actually had lower average life expectancies than in the rest of the country. And now on top of that, it's dropping. You're in Middlesbrough. I think this city scores in the top 3 lowest, worst areas of the country in a number of areas of social deprivation. Austerity is killing people here. And it's about time that that was seen, and that particularly a Conservative government who has been doing this for the past 10 years takes some actions to undo that damage. And I think, considering the drop in life expectancy, we can't take much more.
Is this a stain on the record of the Conservative government, Nadeem?
Well, if we're going to have a sensible debate about this, it's worth looking at the evidence properly. So when I came into Parliament in 2010, Professor Marmot had done a report.
Do you think these comments haven't been sensible?
No, not on the contrary. I think they're being very sensible, and I would not shy away from taking this head on and saying we've got to do much more. But all I would say is in 2010, he said, the Marmot review then, they found poorer people in poorer places will die 7 years earlier than those living in the richest places. He described inequalities in health as unfair. Even removing extremes, in 2010 he said that there's huge discrepancies in life expectancy between rich and poor. So this isn't something
But
that
what's
happened.
new today, let's be clear,
no.
what's new today is that life expectancy overall, which has been increasing at a rate for hundreds of years, now is showing a decrease, and he is blaming austerity, and he's putting that in the last 10 years, which is when we've had a Conservative government.
Is let's look at the whole evidence. So rather, even in 2010, that report...
Yes, but that's talking about the divide, whereas he's talking about life expectancy overall.
No, hold on a second, because he also said it didn't happen by chance. So you see, I did a bit of research on this, knowing that this will probably come up tonight, and I'm not shying away from it. We're not running away from it. Part of the reason why we have made it the law of the land that we put £34 billion more into the NHS is because we've got to deal with some of these inequalities. 14 billion more into education.
Now, don't get me wrong here, I've not forgotten that more than 17,000 people died while waiting for disability benefits, and over 2,000 died shortly after being found fit for work, Ian Duncan Smith. Then there's universal credit. These are the poorest people that are being discussed, so pumping money into the NHS and education system isn't going to do much to help them.
The least well-off local authorities, we've just announced a massive boost for local government, 2.9 billion of additional spending for local government. The least well-off will get 15% more than the best, the more well-off local authorities.
Dude, it's the people whose life expectancy is falling, the poorest ones, the ones for whom life is depressing, and yet you're going to throw money at the NHS, the education system and local authorities. These poor people won't see a penny. Their lives won't change as a result.
So, yes, it is a challenge. We're not shying away from it. People in Middlesbrough deserve for us to do better for them. Many people trusted us with their vote across the whole of the United Kingdom, and we've got to do much better.
So can I just ask then, was the austerity policy a mistake then?
No, I think we had to absolutely balance the books. There's
but
nothing,
why are you spending the money now then if you didn't need to spend it before?
Let me tell you why. Because there's nothing moral or decent about crashing an economy. When Venezuela was floating on a lake of oil, no Venezuelan should be poor, right? What happened was...
Please don't make a comparison between Great Britain and Venezuela. That is
but it's
ridiculous.
Political, it's policy. No, it's policy.
I'll tell you one of the interesting points is, let's get the history lesson right. It wasn't the Conservatives who did this. It was the coalition government. It was our mate Nick Clegg getting in bed with Cameron. And what they did was they didn't realise that the cost of austerity is too much. Austerity is so expensive because not only does it destroy the lives of people in a community, it actually affects their minds. It affects their well-being. The lack of libraries, the lack of schooling, the closing down of our high streets.
All of these protected school budgets. You can't just say this
all
randomly.
All of these things happened, and I can tell you, as a person who's worked in this area, and has worked in this area for more than the last 10 years, on and off over the last 20, 30 years, I can tell you that the cost of austerity has destroyed the community and made people feel as though there is no future.
100% agreed. If you've got no future, what's the point of anything? Why bother? The way things are at the moment, most people are lucky if they break even in life. Others play the game and things get worse. As a nation, I believe we've been deliberately demoralised, our national spirit all but destroyed. Winning the referendum and having Boris win in a landslide, getting Brexit done, has amounted to a beam of sunlight piercing through a gap in the clouds. They can suppress it, but they can't kill it.
If you haven't got a future, if you can't feel you've got a future, then it doesn't matter what a Conservative minister says.
Yes, the woman, yes, in the black headscarf with your hand up there.
Hello. I just wanted to also ask, in your opinion, how much does the job market at present influence that statistic? Because I think there's a lot more...
Which statistic do you mean?
I mean, when the life expectancy went down, to what extent is this job, you know, the gig economy, the 0 hour, the lack of stability, to what extent is that affecting it as well? Because in my opinion, it's not just, you know, the NHS, the public services, it's also the lack of family security, the knowing how much you're going to earn in any given month, being unable to call in sick because you're technically self-employed, how that is affecting people as well, because I think the job market today is markedly different to what it was 10 years ago, and I think that is definitely affecting people's health and mental health as well.
Good point, well made. Funny how none of the panel mention that, even though it's obvious to you and me. Instead they blame austerity. Maybe because there's no political gain in pointing the finger at business. But if they can pin it on the Tories, they can carry on using that against them for the foreseeable future. No pun intended.
OK, let's take a few more from here. The winner in the white jacket.
Why has the Prime Minister gone exceptionally quiet in issues in the North East? Because I believe that some of these key issues that we are discussing today, he's got his vote from the North East, but he hasn't really lived up to the honouring his promise to us.
OK. The man in the check shirt at the back.
Once really to the lady with the fantastic gene pool for longevity. Yeah. Surely austerity's had something to do with it, because if there are cuts to children and adults' mental health services, you know, male suicide is one of the biggest killers for men.
Yes.
You know, clearly that has dragged down the figure.
John?
Well, I mean, that's such an important point, that final point just there. One of the things that this report found is that what the academics call the mortality rate, people dying, is increasing for people in their 40s, particularly from suicide, drug abuse and alcohol abuse. And to answer, I think it was Vaughan's original question, the simple answer to your question is yes. This report is a devastating verdict on 10 years of Tory austerity. And what this report says...
Coalition.
OK. Well, there was a lot of Tories in that coalition.
And then there was a Conservative government.
But what this report says is that life expectancy, which has generally improved year by year for 100 years, has virtually ground to a halt. You're right to say that 10 years ago he did a report highlighting health inequalities. But what's happened in the last 10 years is that life expectancy has virtually ground to a halt and has actually gone backwards for the very poorest women. And one part of the country where this going backwards, this decrease in life expectancy, is most prevalent is here in the North East. That is what is going on after 10 years of austerity. And it's not just about NHS funding, it's about the fact that you've cut billions from children's and young people's services, the steepest cuts here in the North East again. It's about the fact you've closed Sure Start centres here in the North East and across the country. It's about the fact that you've cut benefits. So we've got charities reporting of children scavenging in bins at school, but child poverty has gone up to 4 million. And you know what? It's going to get worse, because there's more cuts coming that's going to push child poverty up to a higher level than it was under John Major, a higher level than it was under Margaret Thatcher. In fact, the highest levels of child poverty since records began in 1961, condemning future generations to getting ill quicker in life and dying sooner. That's Tory austerity, and I'm afraid you should be ashamed.
As I said, it was a Labour government who bailed out the banks, indebting this nation for decades, and now this person thinks he can shift the effects of that onto the Tories. It's not just keeping quiet about what his own party did. He's trying to blame another party for it. He's a snake.
John, no, just 1 second. So, John, why, given all that, why do you think you persuaded people, not in Middlesbrough, but around Middlesbrough, to vote for you?
Well, I mean,
I've
said, haven't I, that general election is devastating for the Labour Party. We got absolutely hammered, and there were seats here in the North East, like North West Durham, Bishop Auckland, Blythe Valley, which have been Labour's heart and soul, really, and we lost. Now, this lady said Boris Johnson was up here lots in the general election campaign. You're more likely to see Elvis Presley riding Shergar than Boris Johnson up here now. But we in the Labour Party have got to do some serious soul searching, because many of the seats, many of the constituencies that went from Labour to Tory are the constituencies where these health inequalities are getting wider and wider and wider.
You still didn't manage to
No,
say people.
I know, and I used to come on your programme and I used to speak with great eloquence, I hope, about the state of things, but we didn't convince people. So, look, we're having a leadership election, as you know, and hopefully when we get our new leader in place, we'll be able to get out there, campaign again and rebuild people's trust. But it's...
Yeah, somehow I doubt that. Pretty much the only thing that will be different about the Labour Party will be the leader. The policies are exactly the same. Good luck with that, John. You'll need it.
We've got a big challenge on our hands, and I have to accept that, and we've got to understand why we failed people so badly, because we did fail people in this part of the world, and we cannot allow that again, because I want a Labour government to deal with child poverty, to deal with these health inequalities, to deal with the state of the NHS, and my party cannot carry on failing people the way that we do.
So, John, there is an example of a Labour government in Wales.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, life expectancy has increased much more quickly in England than it has in Labour-run Wales. Mortality rates amongst women in Labour-run Wales has risen despite falling in both England and Scotland. So this is not a party political point, because Scotland is doing well. No, because Scotland is doing well on mortality rates, whereas in Labour-run Wales, mortality amongst women has risen under Labour in Wales.
Some of the worst mortality rates in Scotland.
And your faux anger is rubbish.
It's not faux, it's genuine anger about child poverty. I'm angry about child poverty.
Because I tell you why, because you get the chance to run Wales and you're running it into the ground, you're running the NHS into the ground there, and Labour's 4-day week would have destroyed the NHS in the first place.
The argument.
I was the families minister. 850,000 children
More children in poverty under your policies. You should be apologising to the people of Middlesbrough and the North East.
850,000 children of mothers from disadvantaged backgrounds get free childcare.
Hang on, because I'm getting deafened. Okay. But the one thing I don't think you did, Nadeem, unless I missed it, was answer Vaughan's question. Is the fall in life expectancy proof that austerity kills, as the author of the report suggests?
I think we have to do much better.
No, is it proof?
No, I think, look, we had to...
This guy is doing the Tories no favours at all. He's probably the worst panellist I've seen on Question Time in a long while.
I don't agree with Lord Bird's point that you can't compare... Politicians make decisions.
Is it proof or isn't it?
We had to balance the books. We had to make sure.
Yes,
we did.
You did
yes,
not
we
have to
absolutely did, because if you crash the economy, you hurt the weakest.
No,
you
that
hurt
is
people.
Absolutely
But society is changing
There
anyway.
are a whole group of people who say that you can actually trade out of austerity. We went into the Second World War with not a penny in our pockets, and by the end of it, we created a prosperous economy.
That was then, John. We need a prosperous economy now. And what is it with this guy and wars? He was born in 1946, yet he carries on like he was there.
If you borrow to spend to save, that is the answer. And you, for ideological reasons, went down the road. You went down the road of what we're going to do is live within our Thatcherite means, and that helped to destroy the prosperity of Britain.
But you can't put everything onto
You could have borrowed your way out of it.
Oh my God, borrow your way out of debt? We should have let a few banks go bust instead of throwing money at them when they can very nearly print money out of thin air. That's the sickener. They gave our earnings to entities that can magic money out of thin air, a Labour government. And as soon as he said the word Thatcherite, he confirmed his political leanings, a left-winger, introduced on this programme as a cross-party peer. So it's 4 lefties, a Tory and a neutral on the panel, almost the same as last week.
We borrowed our way out of it in the Second World War.
For every £4 we were spending, we were borrowing £1. Today, for every £22 we spend, we borrow £1. That is responsibility.
And you cut taxes on your richest, and it was the poorest who suffered the most.
We cut corporation tax and put more money into the exchequer. That's what we did.
OK, Aisha, you want to say something briefly, and then I may move on.
Austerity is not the answer to every problem in the entire world. As societies become more decadent, more developed, you see again and again people become more sedentary, people become more depressed, their communities become more fragmented, they turn more to abusive substances that make them iller and that make their life expectancy reduce. Just as the lady over there was saying, her family went through all kinds of privation and suffering, and they're as strong as oxes. It's a far more complex question The world is changing. Austerity is not the silver bullet that tells you the root of all.
We only mention it because that is what the author of the report said.
Well, that and the fact you're left-wing, the BBC's left-wing, the audience is majority Labour voting, as was. This programme goes out nationally, and the austerity narrative is about the strongest stick that Labour can beat the Tories with at this point in time.
He blamed austerity, so that's why we're talking about it. Right, before we go on to our next question, I just want to tell you that next week we'll be in Tunbridge Wells, and the following week is Budget Week, and we'll be in West Bromwich. So if you want to come along and be in the audience, call 0330 123 9988, or go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. Right, I think we could talk about that report here in the North for some consideration, probably for the whole hour. But there are a lot of other questions you asked too. So in fairness to you, I'm going to move on and take a question from Raymond Latus.
After today's court ruling, should Heathrow expansion go ahead for trade benefits or stop for environmental reasons?
Now, am I right? You supported a third runway at Heathrow,
yes,
Nadine. So should it go ahead?
Well, I think we need aviation investment in this country. At the same time, making sure that we meet our climate challenge of net zero by 2050. I am the business minister, so a couple of weeks ago I had a round table at the Whittle Labs with the Prince of Wales, with the whole of the aviation industry, and we're looking to target to produce an aircraft that can carry 180 people, 500-mile radius. That means it covers most of Europe, that will be fully electric.
So should the third runway go ahead?
Let me get to the point.
I'm just trying to get to the point.
No, as far as the third runway and Heathrow is a private company, and that investment is being made by and that proposal by a private company. Obviously, the legal challenge today was successful, so I wouldn't want to comment on a legal situation.
So the government's got no view?
What I'm saying to you is my view, the government's view, is aviation is incredibly important in our levelling up. The question from Raymond is it important for trade? Yes, it is important for trade.
No, it says, should it go ahead?
No, his question was...
No, I can...
Yes,
that was
aviation needs to go...
After today's court ruling, should Heathrow expansion go ahead for trade benefits or stop for environmental reasons?
So as far as Heathrow is concerned and the legal challenge, I can't comment on that. As far as aviation across the whole of the United Kingdom, then absolutely we need to invest in it, as well as meet our very, very ambitious targets for net zero by 2050. We are going to be the co-chairing COP26, the climate summit in Glasgow this year, end of this year, and we've got to make sure that we do both of those things and do it well. And a lot of the innovation is happening within my department, and we're investing in it because we want to make sure that we have sustainable, clean aviation.
OK, I hear that, but I hear also you're not answering the question, but I've tried twice.
I did answer. No. I said to you, aviation has to grow.
No, should the Heathrow expansion go ahead? And you're saying you haven't got a view on it.
He's a little bit like Boris with his bluster, but he lacks the occasional coherent sentence. I wonder who picked him, the Tories or the BBC?
Raymond, where are you? What's your feeling?
Well, I think the environmental side is extremely important. Clearly, we need to do something regarding that. Nobody wants to underplay how serious a challenge for the whole globe that is. But I think it should go ahead personally, because without a strong economy, without the investment needed to sustain the green future, then yeah, we won't have that environment.
OK, the woman at the back, in the middle there.
You remove it to Gatwick Airport, does that not reduce the emissions? That's what I read today.
If anyone can actually inform me on that, that would be absolutely... We're checking that. Yes, then in the seat.
If there is to be any investment, should it not be in the northeast, one of the most deprived areas in the country?
OK. Alison?
I think today might go down as a really key date in this country, and it's kind of fight back for our planet, really. And that what this legal ruling has meant is that any big project now is there's going to have to be some consideration about the environmental impact. And we cannot just pretend that this stuff isn't happening now. We've seen the floods that we've had over the last few weeks. The rest elsewhere in the world, they've been seeing this kind of stuff for years now, and now it is on our own front door. We cannot ignore it. And we also have to think that sometimes yes, we need a strong economy. Yes, we need jobs, and there's lots of jobs to be had in the green industries, and there's lots of money to be made out of the green industries. But the people that run this country have got to realise that, do you know what? Sometimes things are more important than money. Sometimes our children's futures, sometimes our communities. There are things out there that matter more than making money.
Tell that to the people who have to go to food banks, or those struggling on very low incomes. She strikes me as being a champagne socialist. She can afford to have these views, knowing that she doesn't live the same life as those she's trying to convince. And yet earlier she spoke about austerity. I doubt she felt the effects of that either.
And I think that, you know, Nadim's obviously in a very difficult position, because we know that the Prime Minister's view on Heathrow was that he would lay him down in front of bulldozers. So it's a very tricky one for them to stop it.
Change his mind.
Yes, so it's all, but this is a really big step forward to this country as we finally make a stand about what is right for our future and for our children's futures.
John Byrne.
I used to live under the flight path, so I suffered from living under the flight path. It's a terrible place to live if you live down on the Thames Valley there, with all the planes that are coming in and even more. But I think the real issue to me is, and it's why I've got a bill going through the House called the Wellbeing of the Future Generations Bill. And this is to try and get government to grow up about not doing short-term things. So it's a really, really interesting and exciting idea to have runway number 3, because it has short-term, a real boost to the community, to the economy very, very quickly. But the long-term effects is just devastating. You don't want to be enlarging Heathrow. You don't want to be enlarging all of the other airports around the country with the present technology. You need to be putting your money and your effort, like the American government are doing. They're putting an enormous amount of effort, especially in the military, around how do we produce clean planes. That kind of money is not being put in by Her Majesty's government.
To be fair, earlier Nadine said that they were investing in electric planes. Maybe you didn't hear him.
And has never really been seriously put in. So if we want to do something sensible, we need to stop this generation destroying the next generation, so that the next generation has a poorer quality of life. And that, I think, is the real issue around whether we go for a third runway. I would not go for a third runway. I'd spend the money on our schools and on our libraries and on our community in the northeast of England, and give our children the opportunity of having jobs, which are not £5–10 an hour, but £50 an hour. If you want to get somebody out of poverty, give them a bloody good job.
This is shameless pandering to the audience. Who, in that crowd, would not support a man who just said that people in the north should be paid around £8,600 a month?
I'm really concerned about local transport links like Teesside Airport and what the councillor's done. Ben Hoochin, is it, that's brought business back to Teesside, and hopefully then bring transport links back to the northeast, where we haven't had any for years, and HS2 is totally bypassing the northeast. So all that money that's been piled into it, we're not going to benefit at all, so we should be invested into Teesside.
So the third runway, it's like an irrelevance as far as you're concerned. Yes, the man in the white shirt with the glasses, right at the back.
Yeah, I was going to say most people in Middlesbrough I don't think really care or know that much about what happens at Heathrow, but I think it's absolutely wonderful that Teesside Airport's been reclaimed, rejuvenated, and more services are being provided every week.
Right, OK. So you're bigging it up for Teesside, but I just need to get around the rest of the panel as well. Yes, the man here at the front in the dark shirt. Yeah.
See, I think technology is the way forward. As we've seen with cars developing into batteries and other means, by the time this third runway is built, I believe we'll have cleaner planes, electric planes, and that'll be the way forward. So I don't think you have to worry so much about the emissions, because by the time the planning and the building and everything happens, technology will have caught up and we'll be in a better place. So I think it should go ahead.
OK. Aisha?
I'm generally of the view that we should try to use what we have, upgrade it, make it more efficient, not just build more and more things. But I'm very, very much in favour of trying to spread out the centres for hubs of transport, like the lady over there was saying about Teesside Airport, that's fantastic. I flew in from Dubai to Newcastle this morning. Fantastic airport, super efficient, really great flight. The whole thing worked perfectly. It's because Emirates is quite good and it flies there.
There are, of course, other airlines available. This being the BBC, I need to say that.
Why aren't more airlines doing that? Why aren't we making it attractive to go to more places around the country so people are drawn to different hubs? They're not always going to London, getting on a train to somewhere. So that's what we want to do, is make it really attractive to go to these different hubs around the country by whatever means we can, and that's the way to go, not concentrating more on London.
What about the environmental? I mean, the question that we had from Raymond was about trade benefits versus, you know, the environmental impact. Where does that stand on increasing flights to other airports?
It's not really about increasing flights so much as redistributing flights.
So having fewer to London, more
yeah,
around the country.
Yeah, you can have fewer to London, more going to serve local hubs.
John?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's going to happen now. And if the government wanted it to happen, they'd be part of the appeal. And there's a certain irony that the courts have actually come to a judgment that suits Boris Johnson for a change on this one. But I've actually, funnily enough, changed my mind on Heathrow. I mean, I originally was persuaded of the arguments around trade and investment and the economic arguments. And I remember meeting some of the trade unions who represented the Heathrow workforce. But the more that I've looked into it and the more that I've researched it, I just cannot see how it's compatible with our commitments to climate change.
I think you mean that with all the Labour leadership hopefuls pushing the Green New Deal, that you'd stick out like a sore thumb if you were in support of a third runway, so you've ditched it and now you're pushing the green stuff instead.
And we cannot deny the challenge of climate change. Look, in parts of the country, flooded at the moment, we're seeing more and more extreme weather events. We've got to get serious about the challenge of climate change and what that means for the future of humanity and the future of the planet. And on those grounds, and now I'm going to have to I'm holding my hands up here. I'm saying that a few years ago when I supported Heathrow, I was wrong. Now I don't think it should go ahead.
Okay. Very, very briefly.
Very quick. John, we're putting £2 billion into aviation research, and I would love to invite you in the department for me to show you what we're doing.
Probably need 4 million.
Well, for okay. 2 billion.
All right.
2 billion.
No, you probably need 4 billion.
Okay, well,
and just for I'm so glad to hear people talking about Teesside Airport and Bowen Houch and what he's doing in the area, both in terms of offshore wind and bringing the supply chain, but also some of our traditional industries, like the steel industry. We've got a big plan to decarbonise not just transport, but also steel, to make it the greenest steel in Europe.
Got time for one more question. I'd like to hear from Chris Kelly.
The government have promised to tackle the number of rough sleepers. As a Salvation Army officer in Middlesbrough, I've seen an increase. When will we see that change?
So Chris, just tell us a bit about your experience then of seeing rough sleeping in Middlesbrough.
We operate out of Southfield Road, and we are regularly inundated with people who are having to use our services to get food, to get clothing, to get other support. Drug addicts.
And you've seen an increase in that?
We've seen an increase in it. We've got people that are trying to sleep round the back of our church buildings, anywhere to get out of the cold and the elements. And it's just on an increase, yet we're being told that it's supposed to be on a decrease.
Well, it's decreased this year by, I think it's 9%, but it is nearly tripled since the Conservatives, or since 2010, which was obviously coalition with the Conservatives and then Conservative government. John Bird, you're the obvious person to talk about this. In terms of the impact of homelessness, of rough sleeping on someone.
Well, I'm an ex-rough sleeper, and I can honestly tell you that it's one of the worst things you should be doing, or you shouldn't be doing. If you are a rough sleeper for a couple of months, it takes years to get it out of you. Even a couple of weeks will disenfranchise you in many, many ways and confuse you. And I'm of the opinion, I'm of the very old-fashioned. I mean, I'm an ex-offender who ended up on the streets hiding from the police and hiding from my family. So I wasn't like a lot of the young people now. But I can honestly tell you that in those days, no one was allowed to sleep rough because you got nicked. And if you got nicked, you went into prisons.
That's true. You can be put in prison for sleeping rough, although it doesn't happen that much anymore.
and then you were brought before, and then after a few months you were let out. And that was a very ridiculous situation. But the ridiculous situation we have now, where we have an overspill of the A&E department, we have an overspill of the Social Security Office, we have an overspill of all the health and help that charities can give. So what you've actually got is you've got this compound that is absolutely terrible. It is a human rights abuse, in my opinion, to let anybody sleep on the streets. I would not let one person sleep on the streets. I would create therapeutic communities, and I would give people places of safety where you then sort out the problems. I would transfer the whole concept, the whole argument, to the idea that this is about social health and social well-being. I would move it away from that. But it comes out of austerity. We know it comes out of all the problems that people have had around universal credit. We know it becomes out of the fact that the A&E departments are overfull. We know all these things.
Speak for yourself, John. Although you did say that you were a rough sleeper as well. Was that as a result of austerity? Because austerity didn't begin until 2010. Not only that, the poorest get housing benefit. I knew rough sleepers that had council flats, so I'm not buying into you selling this as being about austerity as well. Oh, and when people use we instead of I, it's a red flag for me. You may speak for yourself only. Don't bring we into it. There is no we. Nice try though, John.
But the answer, in my opinion, is we have to stop allowing our people on the streets, and we have to give them an alternative, irrespective of whether they want to take it or not. They are in a health problem. They have mental health and physical health problems, and it is an absolute abortion that we allow people to live and die on our streets.
The young woman there with the blonde hair, yes.
You know, personally, I've experienced with mental health, and hearing this today, I think some of you are in a different world, you know, saying you're coming from Dubai to Newcastle, you know, in Middlesbrough. The lack of funding for mental health is destroying our communities. And even when you do seek help, you know, I read somewhere there was been 3 deaths recently in our mental health hospitals. So even when people are receiving help, they're being let down. You know, it's completely destroyed our community. Addiction's on the rise, mental health crisis on the rise, and, you know, rough sleeping's on the rise. Like, we need funding, and when are we going to get it?
Okay. Alison?
I think, again, it's the second time we've come back to this austerity issue again today, and the homelessness. It's just a tragedy. Today was absolutely bitterly cold, wasn't it? And I saw this young girl, and she was sat there in a sleeping bag, which was all wet from the ground, and she was absolutely frozen. And this should not be something that we're seeing on our streets, one of the richest nations on earth. How is this happening? And the work the Salvation Army does and all those great charities do is fantastic, but it has to be more than that. It has to be, we need to look at, again, this is a bigger picture. This is so many issues that come into it. We've got abuse of drugs, we've got lack of organisations that are there to care for people, and we've also got a massive, massive housing crisis. Rough sleeping is the tip of the iceberg. That's the bit we see when we see people in sleeping bags and doorways. Beneath that, you've got thousands of people, thousands of young children living in temporary accommodation, sofa surfing. They've got no stability, and all those mental health issues that go alongside that. This is going to cost billions of pounds to fix, and a major overhaul of our housing situation. We need to build more houses. We need homes for families to live in.
OK, so austerity is being pushed really hard by the left, and the virtue signalling by rich people telling poor people what they need when they're so far removed from the lives they're speaking about. The left needs poor people and downtrodden masses, otherwise they wouldn't have anyone to vote for them. Do you think it's in their interest to solve the problems, or is it better to pretend that you care in order to get the vote and then sell the nation and its people out to the EU and the banks like they did last time?
Some of the audience says you're on a different planet.
Yes. I can assure you I'm not on a different planet, although I do work sometimes in Dubai, which means sometimes I do fly from Dubai. But for a very long time I had a relationship with someone who had been made homeless when he was a child, and so we grew, you know, was very aware of the destabilising effect that can have on someone. I've been quite close to people who have been through that sort of privation. And I couldn't agree more that this is an absolute disgrace within our society, within our highly, highly developed, affluent society, to walk past people in doorways, shivering. It's unbelievable. Something has to be done urgently. I don't know, we need to open up town halls, we need to have people supervising. There just shouldn't be another night that people don't have somewhere to go at all times. So on that, I'm just 100% with you.
Okay. The man in the blue shirt.
Should politicians be ashamed in the destruction of the youth services that will exacerbate this problem?
So you think youth services are the lack of youth services are partly to blame? John?
I think this is heartbreaking. And I just want to thank you, Chris, for the work that you're doing with the Salvation Army. And I know you'll be out there in the cold at night time, looking after and supporting people in the most desperate of circumstances.
Yeah, like you actually care. This pandering to the audience winds me up, and what's worse is the way the audience buys into it. There's a disagreement about the exact number, but I think we all know that the numbers of people sleeping rough on our streets has gone sky high in the last 10 years. We all know that local authorities have had their budgets cut and have often had to close beds in hostels. We all know, as we've just heard, that there's over 100,000 children pushed from pillar to post in temporary accommodation, not in a permanent home, not knowing where their next meal is coming from. Oh God, pass me a bucket. Just consider for a second that this is an act from John Ashworth. What sort of character would say those words in that way, insincerely, in order to get the support of the audience, hoping that they'll believe him and vote for his party just so they can win power, which is what they really want? This is surely a shameful, shameful stain on the soul of this country when we are supposed to be, well, when we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We should be getting a grip of this problem and putting more money in. And the point that was made by someone in the audience about mental health services, we know that many of the people who are sleeping rough do have a desperate need for proper mental health care, are often grappling with a serious addiction problem, whether it be substance misuse or alcohol. And yet all those budgets, those health budgets for drug and alcohol, have been absolutely decimated under the Tories. And indeed, every local authority in the country still doesn't know what its budget will be this April because the government have not got around to telling them what the budget is for drug and alcohol. It's an absolute disgrace. The government have got to get a grip and do something about this.
And Nadine, I mean, you can't be happy that rough sleeping has nearly tripled since 2010.
It's completely unacceptable that anyone should be sleeping rough in our country.
Do you take responsibility for it?
We do take responsibility for it, absolutely. And today we announced an additional £236 million to deliver another 6,000 places, accommodation for people who are sleeping rough, bringing up the total to about 1.2 billion now. The lady asked about mental health. You're absolutely right. I've seen it firsthand when I was Children's Minister. Now, there's some excellent work being done. I went to see Leeds Council, who put wraparound service around anyone who, before they even become homeless and a rough sleeper, because there are signs, there are signals. One of them is obviously mental health. Others is when you start missing bills, and they put a whole team around them to keep them in their accommodation. So there's some really good examples of work, and we're learning from that, and we're actually putting more money into it. And the Prime Minister is absolutely committed to this. I want every child to wake up in the morning in their own home and be able to have a healthy meal and go to school and do all the things that we want for our own children. And the Salvation Army do phenomenal work, but we've got to tackle this, and we've got to make sure we do this and do it well, which is why we've made it the law of the land that we're putting another £34 billion additional spending into the NHS. Mental health budgets are going up as well, and the largest increase, I think, in a decade into local government that we've just announced. So a lot of money's going in, but it's not just about money, it's learning from the best examples, learning from what actually really does work, and then putting that, I think John mentioned it, putting that wraparound service, and you see it in local authorities who do it well. Leeds cut down their homelessness figures by, I think, about a third because of that level of work that they've put in. That's what we need to learn from. That's what we've got to invest in, and we're making that investment. We announced it today, that additional £236 million.
Our hour's up, I'm afraid. I know we could talk about this for some time, and lots of you had your hands up, so forgive me, I've not been able to come to you. We're out of time. Next week, as I said before, we'll be in Tunbridge Wells. The following week, we will be in West Bromwich, so do come and join us. Call 0330 123 9988 if you want to be in the audience, or go to the Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. And if you want to carry on this topic of conversation, or the other ones we've been talking about tonight, you can have your say with Adrian, Charles and guests on Question Time Extra Time, and that is on 5 Live right now. But here in Middlesbrough, I just want to say thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to all of you for your questions and the points that you've made. And thank you, of course, to you at home for watching and for listening. From Middlesbrough, bye-bye.
Well, there's another one. Another imbalanced panel and an opportunity for Labour and the left to virtue signal their way back to popularity. They were pretty much unopposed. Austerity is going to be pushed hard for a while, it seems. So let's hope that over the next year or so things improve under Boris, because as it stands, Labour have a stick to beat the Tories with, and they're more than happy to use it. And with that, I'll end this video there. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, as it really helps the channel, and if you want to let me know what you think, you can do so in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. Until the next video, take care of yourselves.